increasing. Okay, right. Okay, well, let's kick off now, and then yeah, people can continue to join as I do the introduction. So welcome everyone. Thanks very much for joining. It's good to see so many people attending an event with finance in the title. It's always a bit touch and go which way that's going to go. So it's great the level of interest we've seen, and certainly across the whole of the last fortnight of Community Fortnight has been really good attendance. So it's been great to see people getting involved and taking the opportunity to share. So it's great. I guess that what we were thinking when we were preparing the content and the team for this session was very much that we've seen over the last sort of 2 years, I suppose, that with the removal of subsidies, renewable energy project development has somewhat been knocked sideways in terms of the business case for those small and medium scale projects. So I guess we wanted to pull together a team which can provide very different perspectives on where we are, where we're going, what works, what doesn't, and hopefully provide some useful insight on that basis. So I guess what a lot of the market is very much facing, or with the scale of what's got to be delivered in terms of 6 gigawatts of renewable energy annually for the next 15 years to get close to net zero, you could be forgiven for thinking that we just need to focus on absolutely enormous projects, so 100 megawatt plus. But I think what we're seeing, and what we certainly see in the sector so far, is that what we shouldn't forget in the pursuit of delivery of that target is that a fifth of the current UK capacity, renewables capacity, is sub 10 megawatts. And if we move that threshold up to 20 megawatts, over a third of the UK's capacity is sub 20 megawatts. So I think even relatively modest scale projects are a critical part of the energy infrastructure, and we can see that continuing. So it's an important space that we tend to be filling as community energy groups. And I think that in terms of that revenue certainty picture, which is in some ways the missing stool or the missing leg of the stool, currently we've got the CFD, or onshore renewables are now included in the CFD, which is great. And over the next week or so, we should have clarity on the allocation sizes for the different pots within the contract for difference. So we should have much better visibility and much more able to gauge the size and scale of projects which will be competing and qualifying within Q4's auction for the CFD, which, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a 15-year price guarantee effectively for renewables. But what we do know about the CFD process is that if projects are sub 5 megawatt, they won't qualify. So we need to look at business models which work for that sub 5 megawatt scale as well. I mean, looking at the market at the moment in terms of projects that we as a community energy sector can interact with, there's currently, or over the last 15 months, 4.4 gigawatts of renewable projects in the UK have been consented. So they've got received planning consent. And a quarter of those, so 1 gigawatt, were onshore wind, a third, 1.5 gigawatts, were solar PV, and the rest of it's offshore. But I think there's still, there's obviously plenty of scope for us to be working with these projects as we all strive to deliver this threefold increase in renewable capacity. So today we're going to hear from 4 experts in the field, all with very different perspectives, which we hope is helpful. So we're going to kick off with Dan from Cornwall Insights about the regulatory policy environment. Then we're going to move to Monika, who's one of the Thrive team, talking about operating at scale. And then we're going to move to Ollie from Riding Sunbeams and Community Energy South on real life examples of renewables projects which are currently in hand. And then finally working or hearing from Simon Roberts from CSE on the insights he's had from mentoring community energy projects. Just in terms of process and procedure, then it'd be great to have questions as we go through the presentations. What we aim to do is have a presentation from each of the members of the team, and then we'll have a Q&A session where we can respond as a panel to questions that are raised. So please use the Q&A function in Zoom to do that. And yeah, we'll come back to that towards the end of the session. And if for any reason you drop off, not physically drop off, but if you drop off of the Zoom session, then feel free to rejoin. It'll still be there. So yeah, just rejoin. So yeah, I think that's all we need to do by way of introductions, other than to say that the session is being recorded, in case you're sensitive to that. And yeah, so if you don't mind, we'll kick off with Dan.
Thanks, Matthew. Just bear with me while I bring my slides up. My team's veteran, but not quite as familiar with Zoom. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Not yet, but I'll tell you when we can.
Great. Thanks, Matthew. I'll just do a quick introduction then while we're waiting for that. So I'm Dan Starman, a lead consultant at Cornwall Insight, and I work on a wide range of topics, including network charging, policy cost and regulation, small and large asset due diligence and commercial support, and heat as well. And I've been invited to talk about what we see going on in the regulatory and policy environment. Has that come up quite yet?
It was saying that Dan's has started sharing screen, but it's still. Oh, here we go. We're up. Yep, you're good.
Okay. Thanks. It's the rural North Norfolk internet connection, unfortunately. So let's jump into this then. So I'm going to skip through just the first few slides. They provide an overview of Cornwall Insight. We're an energy and water consultancy firm that support customers across the value chain, from generators and producers, networks, retailers and end consumers, to policymakers and regulators. And effectively, we support understanding the intricacies of the market, activities of market players, and commercial revenue streams across the UK, Ireland and Australia as well. And we have a wide range of services that I'll just leave there. So in my 10 minutes today, I'll be covering network charging reforms, what's happening and potentially coming down the track, some of the impacts on generators from those reforms, some other elements to look out for as well from a policy perspective, and talk a little bit about flexibility and storage as well. I'll go at a canter, if that's okay, because there's quite a bit to talk about. So to start with then, I'm sure we've all at least heard of the Targeted Charging Review and ongoing Network Access and Forward-Looking Charges Review. Bit of a mouthful, that one. We'll just call it the Access SCR from here on in. And so the TCR focuses on the sunk or residual costs of the network. That's mostly done and dusted, with the last reform to come in probably in 2023. And that's looking to effectively transition sunk network costs from unit rates into a fixed charge. And then we've got the Access SCR, which is at a very different stage of development, it's fair to say. An initial minded to decision on much of the reform is expected in spring 2021, which apparently stretches into June in regulatory timescales. Given the weather, I guess it's only fair to forgive Ofgem for mistaking June for spring, but we're expecting a decision imminently on that. And then a decision on further reform will then come through later in 2021. So let's jump into this second reform in a little bit more detail. So distribution user system charges are likely to change, and GDUOS, so the credits associated with generating if you're connected to the distribution system, are going to change. We don't know exactly how quite yet. A lot will depend on that minded to decision, but there's a strong steer from the regulator that it wants improved locational signals. Presently, if you own a generating asset connected up to 22 kV and connected to the grid, you receive GDUOS credits for every unit you generate. And Ofgem is considering implementing a test at a primary substation to see whether the area is demand or generation dominated. And if it's demand dominated, there's a good chance you'll continue to receive those credits, those payments, because effectively you're helping offset reinforcement in the network. However, if that local distribution substation is generation dominated, there's a chance GDUOS will become a cost. So those distribution charges become a cost. So do be cognizant of that if selecting sites going forwards. That's looking like the likely direction of travel. And worth noting, a similar but inverted principle applies to demand too. So demand users will probably face the highest cost in a heavily demand dominated area. So if you're looking at behind the meter investment potentially, then worth thinking about that as well. That's going to be a complex change. We won't see a MINDA 2 decision on this until a little bit later on in the year. The other reforms will probably be implemented a little bit quicker. So transmission charges, or GDUOS, it's looking likely going forwards that embedded generators will need to be paid or pay transmission charges. That's generally going to be a positive. So a credit if you're in the south, more of a cost if you're in the north, based on current transmission charges. And the triad charging mechanism will be reformed as well. And this is effectively demand users are charged for their use over the 3 periods of peak use over the winter. And it's looking likely that'll be reformed. So if you've got some flexible assets behind the meter helping to avoid that, quite how it's going to be reformed, we're not aware of quite yet. There are some shortlisted options, but there's a potential for some of that peak charge avoidance to be spread out over wider periods. In connection charging, Ofgem's reviewing what it calls the connection boundary. I'm sure I'm not alone in hearing of connection charges that make projects untenable. And under the reform, Ofgem looks likely to reduce those substantial upfront costs and or allow for their recovery on more of an ongoing basis. So that's a big positive for smaller scale assets looking to connect, particularly in more congested areas. Finally, we've got access rights, a really interesting one. Say you have a solar farm, you only want daytime access to the networks. You may therefore receive a discount or eventually be able to trade those access rights with other users. So more choice in access rights, more tailored to users of the network, and you might also be able to share those access rights with local consumers. That, in my view, is a potentially exciting development for community energy, but it's worth saying in this space, a lot depends on Ofgem's ambition here and how exactly those access rights will come through in terms of costs. So that's all great, kind of talking about that at a high level, but let's bring that down into a traffic light system for a grid connected asset, so a low voltage or high voltage connected generator here. So in April this year, we lost the BSUOS embedded benefit. That has around a £3.50, £2.50 to £3.50 per megawatt hour impact on revenues for embedded generators. We've also transitioned to a red, amber, green charging basis for GDUOS. So you get paid more if you're exporting power onto the grid during the peak periods. That second change broadly works out in the wash, depending on which asset we're looking at, what the generating profile is, etc. But clearly, the loss of £3.50 is a bit of a blow for grid connected assets. The distribution TCI implementation has very little impact in April 2022, so we're unlikely to see a massive change in revenues for embedded assets there. And then from 2023, embedded generators, as I note, could face transmission costs. So if you're located in the south of England, that's likely going to be a credit in the south. And if you're located in the north of England, anywhere north of the Midlands, generally speaking, or Scotland, then that's likely to be a charge based, as I say, on the current arrangements. We'll also likely see lower costs of connection to the network and the potential for access sharing at some point in the future. And we will also see a more zonal distribution charging regime implemented at some point. Will be a positive for some, will be a negative for others, obviously very locational dependent. And that's the reason for the little compass that we've got here. So you'll see that again on this slide. So locationally dependent impacts. Let's do the same thing, but look at a behind the meter asset where we focus on supporting an end user in avoiding their demand charges. The story's a little bit different here, to be honest. There's no great impact in April 2021. The loss of the embedded benefit for BSUOS means that the cost to demand users actually falls a tiny bit, but that's lost in the noise, generally speaking. In April 2022, we'll see the TCR lower DUOS unit rates for most areas and move the costs to a fixed charge. So that's less cost that you can help the demand user avoid. However, the impact is highly locational. There will be little impact in regions with a small residual component, so the eastern region being a very good example there, and a higher impact with regions with a high residual. So generally speaking, your more rural networks. And London, as ever, is an exception to the rule in that the unit rates will actually go up. So you'll actually be able to support consumers in avoiding more cost. And you can look at the impact for all areas as the charging statements for 2022 have been published by the distribution network owners now. So you can investigate that in a little bit more detail. In 2023, the transmission TCR implementation means there'll be less triad to avoid if you're supporting end users avoid that over the peak period. And at some point, we'll see complete reform of the triad charging arrangements, which could move the charge to other times and other formats. And there's the outside chance of some potential upside there if it moves to a unit rate basis over a wider time period, if you like. There will be greater regional allocation of charges and credits. Again, strong locational element to that. And we're also likely to see a near doubling of BSUOS costs for the demand user. So while we've lost the embedded benefit, from perhaps 2023, there's going to be much more BSUOS cost on the end user's bill. So if you've got assets behind the meter or looking at assets behind the meter, that can be an additional £2.50 a megawatt hour, etc. A few other things to consider as well. I can't talk about policy to community energy groups without at least mentioning the local electricity bill. This would allow local generators to have a local electricity supply license and supply to customers within a defined local area. It's currently in its second reading in Parliament and has a little way to go. When considering behind the meter or private wire investments, it's worth considering that policy costs can make up to around 20-25% of the unit rate cost of the bill for an end user, and therefore support the investment case for these assets. There is a lot of rumbling occurring at the moment that electricity policy costs could be allocated elsewhere, the main contenders being the gas bill and kind of broader taxation. If it does move to the gas bill, that might support community energy schemes in thinking a little bit more around local heat and what a local heat solution might look like, because the counterfactual fuel, gas, would be slightly more expensive, but clearly there would be an impact on behind the meter generation business cases, if you like. A couple of other policy bits as well. So BEIS was considering requiring capacity market units, CMUs, so assets providing support and getting revenues for being in the capacity market, to be balancing mechanism units or BMUs. Which comes with some costs, some admin requirements there, but has decided against it for now. This is a great thing for a supportive thing for small scale assets, but I think it's been pushed further down the road rather than being taken away entirely. And obviously CFD pot 1 being reintroduced is a very good thing for wind and solar over 5 megs. However, we think it will be a very competitive allocation round later this year. Finally, and very briefly, storage. So storage capacity across GB is rapidly increasing. As of December 2019, we had just over 0.5 gig of battery storage. As of February this year, that had increased to 1.1 gigawatt, with a further just over 0.5 gigawatt under construction and multiple gigawatts of capacity consented. So more and more storage coming onto the system. There are a range of storage business models depending on location, as I'm sure we're aware, can be directly connected to the grid, co-located renewable technologies, and support behind the meter and demand side response, if you like. There are a lot of potential revenue streams for those assets: capacity market, wholesale, balancing mechanism, peak charge avoidance, services to national grid, a whole kit and caboodle. And you need to actively manage and what we term revenue jump to get the most out of them. That can make assessing the business case for the assets tricky without a trusted partner to support you along the way there. But to note, in the area, National Grid is reforming its frequency response and reserve products, which present some opportunity for quick response flexibility. At the same time as barriers to small scale flexibility are lowering in the space, so more opportunity there. Also, DNOs, distribution network owners, are procuring flexibility at the smaller scale too. And this is highly locational. You're either in a region that needs support or you aren't. But storage is very well placed to provide some of these services if short duration and speed is a priority. So contracts can now be up to 7 years in length, which is great. One of my issues with the schemes previously was that they were just 1 or 2 years previously, but 7 years gives you a good level of certainty in revenues. Yeah, they remain a good option for smaller scale storage assets. And that's it from me. Overall, there's a lot of change occurring in the policy and regulatory space. We'll have a clearer picture, I think, of the way forward once the policy logjam following the Energy White Paper clears a little bit, and Ofgem publishes its Minded to decision on the network charging reforms. But my contact details are there should you want to get in touch. And that's all from me. Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks, Dan. That's really helpful and great context. I mean, the prospect of the connection boundary point. Yeah, probably it's been 15, 16 years since you could recover the cost of the connection over the lifetime of the project, or at least part of it. So, yeah, really helpful. Okay, so I've just on the Q&A, we've had a request for a refresh on the agenda for today. So Monika from Thrive will be going next, talking about operating projects at scale. Ollie from Riding Sunbeams and Community Energy South will be coming in on real life examples of renewable energy project generation. And Simon Roberts from CSC will be providing some more insights on community energy mentoring following that. And then after that, so hopefully probably about sort of 1:20ish, we'll be stepping into a Q&A where we'll pick up a number of the other questions which are now coming in. So thanks, keep the questions coming. So now I'm going to pass to Monika, who is the investment director here at Thrive Renewables. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. And thank you, Dan. I found that really interesting presentation. And just before I go to my presentation, I thought it just kind of struck me how, when the ROCs and feed-in tariffs used to be a thing that we all relied on, a lot of those locational benefits, embedded benefits, all of that sort of stuff was not even appearing in our financial models. But that and the flexibility, etc., is kind of, you can see the shift really happening and the energy transition happening, and that's now becoming really the heart of the business cases for many projects. So important to understand on that. So thanks. In terms of what I prepared for today, I'll try to be brief. Just a little bit of introduction to Thrive and some of the products that we're developing. And then we wanted to share with you some of the learning and experiences from the sort of funding and investment that we're working on. So who we are, just a quick reminder. So Thrive Renewables is a sustainable energy investment company. We were set up in 1994 by Traders Bank. We are now separate from Traders, but sort of share very much the ethos and the vision. We to date have funded 25 renewable energy projects across UK, and we typically fund projects from $500,000 to 30 million. That's our kind of usual sweet spot, and we say we plug the funding gaps because we feel that we can fill the space where it might be projects too big for community groups, but probably too big for utilities and big investors. So we sort of look at that space. And what is very unique about Thrive is that we are ourselves owned by over 6,000 individual investors who invested as little as £5 and as much as 5 million, but it's that kind of range, and that accessibility is really key for us. So what we're doing on community investment specifically, but I think some of these also will be quite interesting ideas for you thinking about your projects that you're working on and how you can structure those projects from investment perspective. So on one hand, we're looking at facilitating co-investments for larger schemes. What that means is we see more and more opportunities and projects where there might be big wind or solar projects being developed in your local areas, and local communities take an interest in taking shares or part in those investments. And they often need to bring the investor, the developers or utilities, a speed and certainty of being able to be a co-investor. So this is where Thrive can come in, but that's something that I'm aware a lot of community groups are looking at the moment. Just finding a way to buy into those larger schemes. It will be very important for the future projects, especially as the CFDs as well that I was talking about are coming in. The next sort of product is joint ventures with community groups. It's something we've done a long time ago on Haverick, which is one of the first wind projects in UK. But we really would like to do more of that, and there's a few other projects where we are working with community groups, trying to set up joint ventures on new projects that we're investing in. It's not always a clear business case for that, but very much encouraging when we can do that. And sort of third route is a community funding bridge. So what this is where we provide loans to community groups to buy projects, and the loans can be repaid from future fundraisings, so community groups can in the longer term invest their own funding in projects. But that's a very useful and very good product for those situations where you need to very quickly raise money for a project and you just don't have full amount, and that's where Thrive can come in. We have done a project with Energy for All about 3-4 years ago, Meadmore Wind Farm, that was funded through that product. Talking about investment appraisal, I always come back to the principles, and I actually stole this slide from my own slideshow from last year, because I think it's quite important to always come back to it and think about what is the risk and return of a project when you are deciding whether to invest or not. But the third axis that we at Thrive, and I suspect many of you are also looking at, is the impact that projects are making. So sometimes you might have situations that your pot is limited of how much you can invest, but some projects are just more impact generating because they deliver more community benefits, or the scale or the CO2 benefits are just so much greater. So these considerations are important as well. And then just a few learnings from thinking about projects and how we structure, and some of the risks as well that we see these days on projects. So without subsidies, we all have to think quite hard about what we invest in. And very much right now, the revenue side is where we can see so much could be done either by the local PPAs that Dan was talking about, for example. It could be also done through the corporate PPAs, etc. It's quite important to think, to also realize that without subsidies, there is quite a big risk from financial perspective on power prices. So understanding the power price is something that we are looking at a lot. Also, if you don't have subsidies and you're relying on the future just purely power sale, you should be remembering about the wind and solar kind of resource itself. It can be quite tricky. So just be aware that this changes constantly into wind and solar resource, and we've got years when the wind doesn't doesn't hit the highest levels, and same on solar. So just kind of factor that into your risk and thinking. And another point I wanted to pick up on is around the technological diversification. Really, the adding other sources of energy to your project, and especially things like batteries, can generate more revenues, which and different types of revenues. And what we notice is that often those revenues from solar and wind versus storage, they actually complement each other. And I think that in the future that will be a big part of success for making sure you've got the right levels of different technologies in your portfolio. And the final point I wanted to make is something that's really new, and we see this with lots of actually institutional investors, that they start looking at land as an asset and connecting that with renewables. And I think that especially community groups are really well placed for perhaps becoming more of a landowner and hosting projects on their land, and through that generating also rental for the communities. Specifically on the corporate purchase, so that is a great tool for fixing the long-term power prices, if you can get the right level of those power prices. But they are very complex agreements to really to agree. So working with the experts is really important on that. And we ourselves are trying to find ways on how to make corporate power purchase agreements streamlined, but it's really tricky. So kind of working with experts is really the key. And something I also keep noticing very recently is that first corporates, local authorities, it's very important for them to demonstrate the CSR commitment. So the sort of impact aspect, and actually for them working with local communities is a big benefit. So when you're going to those meetings, negotiating PPAs with corporates, and being community energy is a real asset, and you should really get a real premium for that. So I think that's also important to keep in mind. Right, so just a few more points that in the new realities we all kind of focusing on and looking at. One of them is size really matters. The larger projects have real economies of scale, and on one hand, just being able to negotiate better prices is really helping those returns and boosting the project returns. On the other hand, as well, is the time that's put into larger projects is sometimes not that big, much more bigger than what we've all been used to at the smaller end. So don't be afraid of big schemes. It's just kind of finding the way how to get into them. But the size does really matter when it comes to future projects. And just one more point I'll pick up is around the working capital. which I feel quite passionate about, just making sure that, which goes back to my previous point on the wind, kind of reliability and solar, without subsidies, really make sure that you have you provide enough in your modeling and in your thinking about how you operate the schemes, enough cash flow to make sure that you kind of are stable. So if it's in the summer in the wind, when perhaps your generation is lower, you make sure that you kind of can go through those. So really understand your technology and the seasonality as well during the year of your own technology and your own project. That's going to be very important. And final point is around the grant funding and social capital. It's quite interesting and quite encouraging to see that there's so much happening on that side, and many schemes are kind of accessing various grants, especially those with a sort of more innovative approaches, which is really encouraged and great to see community groups stepping into that innovative kind of space. So we'll be hearing later from Ollie, which would be great to hear about, the innovations that community groups are currently looking into. Pretty much it I prepared for today, and it'd be great to answer any questions everyone has. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Monika. It's really helpful. And I think that with that scale becomes a potential to collaborate, because I think that with revenue certainties falling, the capital requirement hasn't changed, and the amount of debt accessible to these projects is probably hindered by the lack of revenue certainty. So I think that opportunity to collaborate with others is really important element here. Great, thanks. Well, now if you're okay, Ollie, I'd like to pass over to your good self.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matthew. And how wonderful to follow Monika and Dan, because I picked up a lot from both of your presentations, particularly Dan on the local electricity bill and behind the meter, and Monika on that kind of size matters and the corporate PPAs and CSR. So I'll share my screen. And oh.
That's working. Well done.
It isn't, but that's, sorry, hold on.
It looked interesting.
Yeah, no, good. Oh, sorry, hold on. Best laid plans. And we did practice this at the beginning. I've lost my presentation.
Yes, we did.
Just while Ollie's doing that, then yeah, just there's a nice flow of questions coming in, but do, if there are questions spring to mind as we're going through, pop them in the Q&A, and yeah, we'll endeavour to cover them at the end.
No, hold on. There's hold on. Oh, excuse me, one sec.
Okay.
I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, Dan, I don't know, maybe while Ollie's just looking at that, then I thought it's interesting to hear you saying about the policy costs potentially migrating towards gas as opposed to electricity. I guess that's because heat is, or electrification is required for heat effectively in a low carbon environment. I didn't know how much progress had been made with that, or is it really early days in the thinking there?
Yeah, so I think, so there's been a discussion in the industry for a little while around it. I know there's been the net zero spending review from Treasury. We're still awaiting the findings from that. There are a few other programs going on. So BEIS is exploring policy and network costs for its alternative energy markets program, which it's just launched as well. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Matthew. So it's electricity delivered to the end user is about 4 to 5 times the price of gas. And when I think as from a policy perspective, we're trying to decarbonize heat, and heat pumps, for example, have a coefficient of performance of 3 to 4. So the cost differential immediately kind of wipes out the efficiency of the heat pumps. So I think from a policy perspective, given that we want to install 600,000 heat pumps per year by 2028 in people's homes, the ongoing operating costs, if you like, of the different assets, just when the counterfactual fuel is so low, just don't make a huge amount of sense. So that's why I think government's primarily looking at reform in the space.
Great, that's really helpful. Perhaps that properly leveling up agenda from the government. That's great. Thanks. Right, back to you now, Ollie.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for that and for filling in, Dan, while I sorted my presentation out. Hopefully you can see my presentation now. Yeah, great. Well, hello everybody. Yeah, I'm Ollie Penderd. I'm the Chief Exec of Community Energy South and co-founder of Riding Sunbeams, and director of Community Energy England. And which launched the sector report yesterday, which has been really helpful during Community Energy Fortnight. So I'll just give you an introduction to Community Energy South, and then we'll dive into some examples from community energy groups. I'll talk a little bit about a mentoring program that we're doing in the Southeast called Pathways for Community Energy and how that links with local area energy planning, and a bit about the Greater Brighton region and some work we're doing there, and a rural heat project, which I think is quite interesting from what Dan was talking about. So Community Energy South, we've been set up in 2013 by community energy groups in our region. We ran a mentoring program, and nowadays we're there to help stimulate the growth of community energy in the Southeast, like a donut around London. And we have a newsletter, and we get people in with masterclasses and try and create the network really and support growth of the sector, and get people innovating and employing. So partnerships are really important from a regional perspective. And so we do a lot of work with UK power networks, but also the local authorities, and how they can sort of embed community energy into their strategies. But also we're aligned with particularly the larger infrastructure organisations, like UK Power Networks, but Network Rail as well, who are interested, are aligned with our principles as the community energy sector, and our CSR and the social impact benefits. So that's really interesting. And one example, we spent a lot of time within our network working with the water companies in the Southeast, and they were really keen to go to renewables through their price review period. And that's something that we looked at with community and water companies, and the opportunity for renewables. Actually, they've done it with the private sector and are starting to go to net zero, but we're very proud of the part we played with that. And we made sure on a regional basis that we've embedded our community energy members and groups into the regional energy strategy, which is run by the LEPs and the Greater Southeast Energy Hub. And there are 5 hubs around the UK, and it's a kind of similar perspective. They're really starting to embed community in regional strategies, and that's really important from a local authority perspective. Now, Monika mentioned Riding Sunbeams and our work with Riding Sunbeams. This is a site where we connected and worked with DFT and Innovate UK to connect the first solar project to connect the railways. And that work with the Regional Energy Hub and all the LEPs and the local authorities and BAYS and Network Rail was fundamental in making that a success. And we've now been awarded the Getting Building Fund to build out a 4 megawatt scheme in East Sussex and actually take this to scale. So that's really exciting, and Thrive and the team have been really supportive on that as well as partners. And we're also part we've also embedded community energy into one of the last of the European projects. In fact, there are two covering the southeast of England, called the Eastern New Energy Project and the Southeast New Energy Project, which brings together 20 partners, including the Energy Systems Catapult and other organisations, to support net zero going forward and the renewable energy sector and accelerating it. And that's really important, sort of last of the European projects, and we're proud to be part of that. Now, so we've got 42 community energy groups that we support now in the southeast of England. It's really exciting, and here's a few of them. Alton Energy and Sustainable Overton have come through on our mentoring program, in our Pathways program. So they're new fledgling groups. But at the same time, we've got Energise Sussex Coast, who focus on fuel poverty and vulnerability, and the Brighton Energy Co-op, who are leading on a project on solar canopies and electric charging, who give expertise. You know, they've been around now for over 10 years, and Avesco and other groups. And also there's a number of solar farms in the region, like Ferry Farm from Communities for Renewables, have set up that have got amazing social benefits and are really driving solar farms in the southeast and supporting the rest of the network. So we're really proud of the network that we've set up, and they're very supportive and stronger with each other, and regularly doing share offers. Reading Hydro have just launched their last hydro project, and I think raised nearly 1.5 million to get that off the ground, and actually connected yesterday and started generating properly. So, you know, we kind of work together as a network. Now we've set up Pathways as to build the network. So Community Energy Pathways it's a communications program, and we have a step-by-step process that links communications and new communities with the mentors from all the groups, drawn from all the groups in the southeast, so that they can bring their expertise into those new fledgling groups. And Hampshire County Council, Essex, and South Downs National Park Authority, and Surrey County Council now, and Norfolk, are all coming forward on those Pathways program, creating new networks. And it's very interesting to combine community energy from a bottom-up perspective with local authorities looking at trying to achieve net zero. So excuse my diagram, which I put together earlier, but this is it really. So you've got local area energy plans that will lead to net zero. And so you've got large authorities really committing to net zero, and the leaders in those authorities wanting to look at their own portfolio, but also the communities to go to net zero. And then we're creating community energy networks below that on a regional perspective that can feed in and advocate and bring in community finance and other links to the network and community energy options. So I really do think that it's a case of a top-down, bottom-up perspective, and we've got a team that are really focused on that and dedicated to it. And it's great to see new groups popping up in areas in the east where there's never been groups before, and bringing that forward. And we're able to have sort of bring the network together and have larger conversations on behalf of those groups with new solar farm developers and investors. Down in Brighton, I'll give you an example quickly. Down in Brighton, there's the Greater Brighton regional perspective, where we've embedded 10 pledges, the Greater Brighton 10, which includes energy, kelp forests, and all sorts towards net zero. And again, community energy is right in the heart of that, because we've got about 7 community energy groups just in the Brighton region who are really thriving. And in fact, they've got larger energy teams than the local authorities have, and more expertise in some places. And so just in the Brighton region, this is the pipeline of investable projects, not only community energy, but these are all large developed projects that are looking to be invested in and to go to scale. So it's really good that we brought all those together. So the market's interesting. Now, just an example, this is, as well as riding sunbeams, this is a sort of something that we're creating with rural communities and heat. And it kind of aligns with what Dan was saying about the local electricity bill and behind the meter benefits. So we're building with UK Power Networks, who are a very important partner in the Southeast, and Borough Happold, who are a sort of global energy agency, a roadmap for rural communities to go to net zero. And we're doing this, it's really a behavior change project. So the community that we're looking at has 750 homes. Over nearly 80% of the village has oil for heating, and they want to come off oil, but it's not affordable for people to come off oil and go to air source heat pumps. But what we said to the Energy Networks Association, UK Power Networks, this village is so well engaged. If they all come off oil and all go to electric vehicles, we'll blow your grid. How much will that cost you? And they said, well, that's really interesting. Let's have a look. So we're working together. We're actually simulating the village and looking at the issues of a whole village going to net zero and how do you finance it? So we haven't got to the solution. You know, the grant system doesn't work for heat at the moment or RHI. So we're looking at different tools and methods to try and finance that, whether it's through mortgages or a community bond where my neighbour can invest and then I can install and benefit from that. So we're looking at solutions for that. And in November, we're going to take those solutions to government and see if we can expand the network, but also create jobs for local people. And in amongst all of that, we're looking to embed around this one rural village, a whole network of community energy schemes that can work behind the meter and get everyone's electricity bills down. So yeah, that's a little bit of an example of what's going on in the ground in the Southeast. Thank you very much. I'll pass on to Simon.
Thanks, Ollie. That's really helpful, and obviously tons of really good work going on. As you would see, there's a few questions appearing in the Q&A around how to source that funding, how to find those funding sources. So we'll come back to that following on from Simon's presentation. But for now, we'll pass over to Simon. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Matthew. And I'm Simon Roberts. I'm the Chief Executive at the Centre for Sustainable Energy. We're a national charity based in Bristol, and we've been supporting community energy groups for more than 20 years now. But our particular role that I'll be drawing on, mainly done by colleagues in our team of now 90 people, is we lead the consortium for the Next Generation programme, Power to Change setup, particularly looking at innovative business models. So, and for full disclosure, I'm also the chair of the board for Thrive Renewables, which is probably why you've got me here rather than the people who actually know about this stuff from our office, because it was harder for me to refuse an invitation. I'm going to focus on community-led action that's delivering sustainable energy projects. I think it's always worth stepping back and going and thinking we shouldn't underestimate the importance of community-led action that engages citizenry, develops understanding, creates a sense of shared purpose, puts pressure on those that in power but isn't trying to get out there and build assets. That's actually very important as well. But obviously the focus here is on those initiatives that are building projects. And I've got sort of three observations to share. The first is that it's all about new business models. We've talked a bit about private wire and local supply and stacking value on flexibility and EV charging, and lots of buzzwords floating around. These all have much higher risks. They have tighter margins, they're more complicated, they need more focus. That tends to mean also they'll be less generous in terms of being able to generate a lot of value to a community in terms of a fund to do something else with. And it also means that because of that need for greater focus, it potentially reduces the number of other things that communities typically want any individual project to do. So that's a sort of first thing. But when I say it's about new business models, it's not really. We're not trying to create some clever derivative or financial engineering. This is basically, the business is still the same. You need to get more income over time than you've got costs over time. That's the McCorber sort of principle. It's never really changed. If you don't do that, you face misery. If you do that, you face happiness, I think is the way he characterized it. And it's still much the same. It's just that the sources of income are shifting, and I've listed a few of those already, as have Dan and Ollie and Monika. But also there's a different shape to the costs in terms of the sorts of kit you have to buy, and also the balance between sort of ongoing costs and understanding, which affects the type of funding that you can raise, be that needing more equity rather than debt, because the banks as yet are slightly nervous about some of these more new business models, or different income streams, in effect, is what they're worried about, that are maybe less reliable than have been in the past. But it also means that there's money for innovation in a way that there wasn't when the feed-in tariff was around, through, as Ollie's pointed out, the distribution network operators, UK research and investment, innovation, UKRI, in England, the energy hubs, and a lot of experience to draw on. But it does need a different approach, and as I say, may need community organisations planning projects to be a little bit more focused in the type of project they're trying to do in order to do that, and not assume that the sorts of generosity we could find in feed-in projects in the past is going to be available in the future. So just being realistic about getting on with it. So that's the first observation. It is about new business models, but it's basically about new sources of income, different types of costs, and as a result, particularly of the sense that these are innovative, there is money available for innovation. The second one is that community energy groups don't actually have any superpower, but they have got plenty to offer. They haven't got a superpower because they can't buck the market or rewrite basic commercial logic. And we get involved quite a lot with people coming to us saying, well, we're going to do this. And you go, but no one's ever done that. No one's managed to make that sort of operation stack up. And the most obvious one I get thrown at quite a lot is to develop a completely cooperatively owned building supply chain. I know Carbon Co-op are doing a pretty good job at trying to do that in Greater Manchester, but they're generally working with creating a structure for privately owned businesses to join, rather than assuming you can do that. But it also comes back to the basic commercial logic that, and it's always very telling, if there isn't anyone who's done this before in the private sector, managed to pull it all together, then it's probably because there are genuine limitations in how to pull this together. As an example, flexibility markets, and Dan could comment on this, still a lot of issues about stacking revenue and being able to generate particular sort of making decent money out of that, and making a business case for it, particularly in the main area that community groups would like to be involved in, which is more domestic sector, where we haven't even got smart meters in yet. So we've got to be thinking we aren't going to be able to break system. We are going to need to wait for markets to be ready, rather than assume that we can do it. But that's also one of the reasons why there is grant funding for innovation, because it gives you a chance to try some of these out, sort of working around some of those limitations in the same way that DNOs are doing that through their innovation projects. But community energy groups do have something others don't have, which is, or don't have as well, I don't think it's a unique feature of community energy groups. It's the potential to be a trusted intermediary, to reach potential takers up of local services and provide that at a local level for certain aspects of something. But for that, there's a need to be highly professional, team up typically with those who are trying to do some of these things, like aggregators who've got the kit and the technology, or the platforms, car club providers, heat network developers, others who may be bringing more into the mix now than was typically the case when community energy groups were building and owning solar farms in the past. So needing to think about that, but also distribution network operators and others, or even potentially larger community energy groups who are already in the mix, or charities like ourselves who've got projects which could benefit from that sort of intermediary role. So thinking kind of quite carefully about the ability to buck the market or not, and not assuming you have a superpower, I think is quite important. And then the sort of third rule is about actually what we're seeing and in terms of scaling, the kind of building on past success seems to be key to me. Most of the groups that we see active in this field, most of the groups that have got involved in the next generation innovation program, and I'll put a link up at the end to links to all those groups and what they found out, and a really good series of innovation webinars held fairly recently around this, which I know Community Energy England was very supportive of as well. But that's what those groups have found, partly because of the generosity of the tariffs they were getting on their existing projects, is their ability to either allocate money at risk to do new things and take some of those risks, or we're in a position where they'd managed to fund some professional staff that could start looking at these innovation funds and develop projects and so forth, so they could establish those partnerships and had a track record of being able to deliver things, so they could go into those partnerships sort of on a much more equal footing than in effect as someone who's been given a job of sort of door knocking at a local level. And you see that, for example, in NADA Community Car Club in Wiltshire, in Bath and West Community Energy's Flex Community project, looking at trying to develop flex community. Both of those drew on innovation funding to try things out and learn a lot, so that as the more commercial income streams and the market start to deliver that value, they're in a position to step in and shift from a sort of more grant innovation type risk capital type approach, and do think of those grants as risk capital rather than assuming you're going to raise it from other people, into a position where they're able to do that. But also in terms of building on that past success, we also know there are new groups who are coming in, people who have awoken to the climate emergency, if you like, and believe in the need to do something, and may have found that there isn't something in their area of setting things up. And what we've managed to do within the Next Generation program is develop a really excellent set of mentors who've got experience, a number of whom I think are probably on the call, in developing community energy groups, but also trying out some of these new business models, and they get drawn upon. But there has been a slight hiatus in pushing that hard because someone involved in it had a family bereavement that they need to take. But it's live. It's, again, I'll put a site up. But there's what's actually proved to be a problem, which I think is something we all need to reflect on, is we found the mentors quite easy. There's a lot of people willing to provide support, be funded to do that, but actually to provide it and pass on their learning and understanding and provide a bit of challenge and support to new groups, people looking to learn. What we found was there's a lot of people coming forward with something to say, far fewer that seem to want to learn or acknowledge others who've already trodden this path. And I do think that's something community energy sector as a whole kind of could do a bit of thinking about, in terms of how it recognizes the sort of leaders, but also, and I think it's, naturally, if you're in a place and no one else has been doing something and you've come to it now, you may well think that no one else has ever done this stuff before, but there's an awful lot of help out there. And what we found in that program is actually people seem less ready to take it up than you'd have thought they should be, if they're particularly given the complexities of the market they're now in. So I'm just going to very quickly share the slides, so you've got those links that I mentioned. They also include a link to a blog by Keith Hempshire, our head of local and community empowerment, for Community Energy Fortnight, on 10 rules for community energy action success. I'll leave that up just for a little bit and pass back to you, Matthew.
Thanks, Simon. That's great. Helpful insight as ever. So now, yeah, we're moving to the Q&A section. I'll try and, there's been a healthy flow of questions, so I'll try and distribute it. So what I might do is do a batch for the panel. So Dan, it would be helpful if you could respond to some of Jake's questions on the Q&A. I think you can see those. If you can't, let me know. And then it would be helpful, perhaps, Ollie, if you could comment on some of the partnerships between community energy and local authorities, which is something that's come up, and also some of the funding sources available for community energy projects. That'd be really helpful if you cover that. Monika, it would be helpful. There's been a question around a one-stop shop funding solution for communities, so it might be helpful if you could cover that one. And just while you're all thinking about that, I'll respond to a question that's come from Emma Bridge of Community Energy England itself, around the sort of tax efficiency or tax efficient structures for investing in renewable energy, so and community energy. So I think at the moment, I guess probably one of the most effective tax incentives for investment in renewables was the Enterprise Investment Scheme for EIS. And that was working very well, particularly in the solar feed-in tariff rock boom. But that has been closed down principally because projects were, investors were benefiting both from the tax break on the investment and also on the from the support provided to those schemes. So that's no longer an option. I think something which is very live and present is where debt products or debt instruments, so community bonds, are put in place and raised around projects. They can qualify for what's called, or often can be wrapped into, an innovative finance ISA, which is very tax efficient for the investor, and so it can be held within the investor's ISA pot. The areas which probably are a bit harder to crack at the moment around the inclusion in pensions. So structurally, there's nothing stopping a lot of investments being held in a person's SIP, and this isn't tax advice, by the way, but so there's nothing structurally stopping investments being held in people's SIPs. But typically, if the underlying business or enterprise is unlisted, then the IFAs, so the independent financial advisors, won't tend to go near it. So really, at the moment, probably the best thing is to structure things structure investment which is eligible for the innovative finance ISA. But again, I'm not offering advice on this because I'm not qualified to, but that's just a sense of where the market is. So maybe we'll move to Dan now to cover some of Jake's points.
Great, thanks, Matthew. Yeah, so I'll just read them out as I go. So the first one was, please could you explain the distribution access rights opportunity? This is a great question. The short answer to that, unfortunately, Jake, is actually no, not in great detail. So we'll know a lot more when the Minder 2 decision comes out from Ofgem on the forward-looking and access SCR. What we do know is that Ofgem's exploring having time profiled or more specific access rights within that, and presumably therefore your access rights to the so your charges, if you like, for having access to the network would be lower, and also shared access as well. So you've got you've got end consumers within the local area, and let's say a small scale generation asset within the area, maybe within the same substation area. So Ofgem's looking at, okay, so if there's a local kind of pocket of shared access, then what do the charges look like? Will there be rewards? Is there a lower kind of charging threshold for those users, if you like? We don't know exactly how that's going to come through in distribution costs, for example. There's a lot still to be ironed out, but they're the kind of things that Ofgem's exploring. And as I say, we need to wait for Ofgem's Minder 2 position to really see the detail of how that's going to work. We don't have enough detail at this point to really kind of point the finger at it, other than to note, look, if you're interested in local small scale energy located near some demand users, then there might be a specific opportunity there for sharing those access rights. And quite how that comes through in terms of the network charges is still to be defined a little bit. But as I say, we'll await that Minder 2 decision with interest. I'm just going to jump to Jake's third question quickly. So, do you think we'll see any change to transmission cancellation change liabilities, which is substantially increasing the risk investment involved in developing a community solar project? Yeah, interesting question. It wasn't one that I was specifically aware of being a particular barrier for community energy projects. So really interested to hear more on that. Jake, I'm not aware of any immediate changes going through for that, but yeah, as I say, very interested to hear what the particular issue is there. And the second one, how are solar funds looking at subsidy-free revenue streams? I think that's a really interesting question. So with solar particularly, so solar generates at during daylight hours, obviously peaks during around midday, etc., etc. So solar, if you were to invest, I think, solely in a solar asset, there is a substantial kind of market risk. So as Monika spoke about, if you're reliant entirely on power prices and your embedded benefits, and you only have a single kind of technology there, so there's no diversification, you are heavily exposed to the market price and market risk. So what we tend to see people doing when they're looking at solar, and it's worth noting as well, the more solar we roll out, the more there will be a peak of generation during the middle of the day, and there might be an increasing kind of cannibalization effect on the market rate during the middle of the day. So what we're seeing is people looking at so panels facing slightly different directions. We're looking at people over sizing their solar assets for the connection. So they're effectively exporting more during the shoulder periods. So they're not as exposed to that kind of cannibalization effect. We're also looking at diversification. So people exporting part or all of that solar through a private wire. And we're also looking at mixtures with other technologies as well. So battery storage, etc., diversifies the revenue streams that you're involved in and can potentially benefit from, and ensures that all of your eggs aren't necessarily in one basket, so to speak. So that's what we're tending to see. But that's such a broad question. I don't know if there are any other views from the panel.
I suspect as well, in terms of the scale really matters, I think. If you are buying panels for a 100 megawatt scheme, the cost of those will be a lot very different from if you're buying it for a small private wire even. I think that cost is really making a change in the model. And the other kind of interesting question now is inflation, what people assume on inflation, because that's on the back of pandemic, that's not very clear picture what will happen. And at this moment it's quite high, but it might not, it might go up or down. But that can generate a huge change in the model as well. But from our perspective, it's important to be careful with these kind of assumptions.
Nice, thanks, Monika. I'm conscious that we're rapidly running out of time. There've been a couple of questions around the interaction with local authorities. The climate emergencies, the local plans are really helpful steps in the right direction, but how some of that's turning into concrete action and how community energy can sort of engage with that directly. I don't know, Ollie, have you got a sense for that, or anyone else from the panel?
Sorry, say again, Matthew.
So in terms of the interaction between local authorities,
exactly,
and community energy.
Sorry, and I was actually answering the question in the Q&A, and it's come from the team at Energy Systems Catapult, actually, who are doing those higher level local area energy plans, preparing the local authorities. And there are lots of good examples historically from groups that work with local authorities, like Plymouth Energy Community or Vesco, where I'm sitting today. They've got a great working relationship with the local authority.
Oxford.
And Oxford, low carbon Oxford, of course. Thank you, Liz, sitting next to me. But that's what we're trying to do in Pathways, is create that network that's actually, it's embedded by the local authorities. So they want, the community energy groups now to come forward so they can interact with them. And then we can interface the expert groups with the new starters. So lots of examples. Yeah, do email me and I'll give you some live examples offline.
Actually, can I just
funding, Simon, the other question was about funding. The Rural Community Energy Fund is there. It's run by the energy hubs. It looks like it's going to be extended. We're talking about them now about extending it long term. And that's something for groups to look at feasibility studies, and it's great fund.
And potentially extending to urban spaces as well, because it was always a slightly weird distinction between that. Just on the local authority stuff, I would say to people, don't wait for a local authority to come to you, or necessarily assume that even if they're doing some work on a local area energy plan, that's tied into anyone who might actually take initiative in a local authority. It's a sort of, need to think of this. I think I said I put a blog out about it about a year ago. You need to think of this as more like jazz than a Mozart symphony. This is not something where someone has written out exactly what's going to happen over the next 10 years in any given place, even if they've got a local area energy plan. You can't nail it down that much. You need to think about what the first next steps are and how you start moving in an appropriate direction. We know what the chord sequence is. We need to phase out gas, phase out internal combustion engine, eat less meat, do fly less, all those things we know we've got to do. Exactly what they look like in any given place is dependent not only on how that place is engaging with it, but also obviously as a relation to that national policy. It's too complicated to write it all down. So we just need people to start joining in and not assuming someone's going to cue them in and tell them when to start, or that a local authority is the place where all those answers will come from. Obviously, they do have access to funds potentially if they can get their act together and persuade the government that they have the right caliber of to take it through. I hesitate to say, and the right political colour council these days, but that seems to be becoming an increasing issue. But anyway, so yeah, I would and do have a look at it on our website. If you type in local area energy planning, you'll see some more work on. We did actually with the energy system catapult on a sort of method for the Ofgem been promoting as a way to think about how those things should be done, and that includes what sort of stakeholder engagement should be done.
Thanks very much. And I'm afraid, yeah, we're pretty much out of time, but we will. There's some other questions there which we'll endeavour to respond to directly. So thank you very much for those. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it informative, and I really appreciate the input from the team here on the panel. So thank you very much, everyone, for that. And yeah, all the best with developing more community energy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.